Hey everyone, it's Anna. Welcome back to my channel. So I thought I would share some details and give a quick demo of how I do the technique where that I use to create these cards, particularly the stamped layer that I painted and distressed and sparkled up. So all three of these cards use the same technique, and in case there are some of you who are new to my channel and new to this technique that I love to do, I thought I would just do a quick video that shares this process with you. So I've gone ahead and pulled out some of my supplies here. Let me go ahead and set those aside. I'm going to be using the January limited edition set from Impression Obsession. This is the nice red rubber set that they have put out for the month of January. And I'm going to use this heart wreath here. I'm also going to be using my mini Misti, and I love this tool. I use it almost every time I stamp. Sometimes I hold the stamp in my hand to stamp. Sometimes I mount them on little blocks like this, but the majority of the time that I stamp, I'm going to be using the Misti, and I like this mini Misti because my workspace is not very large, and it gives me lots of room around my Misti to work. I'm going to be using some watercolor paper. Now I'm using B watercolor paper. It's some paper that I picked up at our local art supply store. The cover of it looks like this, and it's from the B Paper Company. And I know they used to sell B Paper Company watercolor paper at Hobby Lobby, but I think they've switched out to selling only the Hobby Lobby brand. I don't even think they sell arches there anymore. So I'll put a link to where I found this on Amazon as well. But I did pick this up at our local art supply store. And then what I do is I take a couple of pieces out of it and I cut it down to my normal size watercolor pieces that I like to use. And I just keep them in this little plastic sleeve here on my desk. And that just lets me really quickly grab a piece of watercolor paper that's already cut down to a size that I frequently use and get started on any project that I'm working on. So let's go ahead and mount this heart here to my mini Misti. And if you've never used the Misti, this is the mini Misti. There's also a regular sized Misti. I'm pulling one out of my workspace here, which is this size here. This is 6 inches in length and 8 inches long here. So it's quite a bit larger than the mini Misti, which is basically 4.5 by 6. So let me go ahead and look here and see if I've got this centered quite nicely. And what I also like about this is it has grid lines here on the lid. Here, I'll see if we can see them. Yeah, so see, it has grid lines here on the lid, and it makes it really easy to line things up really nice and straight. So you can see here that I don't have it quite centered with my panel. So what I can do is go ahead and scoot it over here. Wait, let's see, which way do I need to move it? That way. Then I can just quickly pick it up and scooch it over just a little bit. And it makes centering my stamp on my watercolor paper, or whatever paper I'm using for my project, really easy. So there we go. I think that will look really nice. So let's go ahead and give that a whirl. I'm going to be stamping the heart image in some permanent ink because I'm going to be watercoloring. So I'm going to be using this vintage sepia from Versafine. This is a instant drying pigment ink, which I really, really like. Just going to ink that up and give it a quick press down. And one of the things I like doing is using my sleeve. I'll generally have a long sleeve shirt on, so I use my sleeve so there's not as much drag against my skin. And you can see here that I got an okay impression, but I do have some areas where I need to get some ink. And because this is a textured watercolor paper, that was to be expected. It does not surprise me at all that I need to ink this again. And I might even actually ink it a third time, just to make sure I get a really good impression. that looks all right, but I think I can get a little bit better over here in the bow, and maybe even a little bit better over here on this side. So I think three times today will be the charm. So I'll go ahead and give this another quick press. So I love this tool because I can stamp things in exactly the same spot several times and get a perfect impression for my project. And it's wonderful for sentiments. So that looks beautiful. I'm quite pleased with that. The other thing I'm going to be using is this little tool. This I came across earlier this year. My friend Lydia, she has a YouTube channel called Understand Blue or Understanding Blue, and she was using this one day. And basically what it is, it's a stamp cleaner. It's a little scrubber by Hero Arts, and it has a removable, washable pad on it. And so I just washed this last night, actually. Just pulled this off, took it to the kitchen sink, put some Dawn dish soap on it, and gave it a quick scrub with like a nail brush, and then rinsed it off and dried it really nice and put it back on, and it's really nice and clean now. It's stained, of course, but it's still clean. Let's see, where is my cleaner? Here it is. And then I just use Stampin' Mist. I've had this bottle for eons, and I have a refill of it, so that's what I use to clean my stamps. And so I just give it a quick spritz on the cleaner, the scrubby pad, and then rub it on my stamp here, and it cleans it perfectly. So I love that thing. Love that thing. All right, so now that I have this ready to go, I'll go ahead and show you what the next step is. Just have a piece of paper here. So I want to go ahead and add some distress ink to my watercolor paper before I go on to my next step. So what I'm going to do is take this vintage photo distress ink. I also like the tea dye color, which is this one here. But I'll go ahead and use the vintage photo today. And I have two of them here on my desk. One of them is older than the other, and I don't remember which one is the juicier of the two, so I might have to switch pads here midway through my project. But I'm just going to brush on. This is an ink blender brush. You probably have seen these if you've been stamping for a while. This one actually happens to be from Picket Fence Studio. They were the first company that I knew who put out this style of blending brush. And so I'm just going to give my panel here a quick inking, and even do some in the center there as well. All right, now I can set that aside. And actually I use this blending brush just for browns. You can see my washi tape here on the handle. So I don't even have to clean that thing off. I can just set it aside and it's ready to go for the next time I want to use it. So I'm also going to use the vintage photo for some stamping. I've pulled the sentiment, the longer sentiment out from the set. It is this one here that I'm going to be using. And I just like it because it has the smaller text. It's a little flourishy and hard to read. But what I'm going to do is actually ink this up. And give it a little spritz of water here. And I'm going to stamp it down on my panel in some random places. And you can see how it kind of, the ink stamps down a little bit speckly and watercolory. That's the look I'm going for. So I'm going to re-ink my stamp here. Give it another spritz with water. This is just regular old water. Give it another stamp here, and maybe a little bit over here. And I'll keep this aside because I'll probably want to do a little bit more of that stamping as well. So the next thing I'm going to do is actually watercolor my image. And the watercolors I'm going to be using is this Milang set. It is a set of 48 paints. There are 36 standard watercolors, and then there's this fourth row here, which are all shimmer paints, and these are so fun to work with. I was actually provided this set earlier last summer, and and I have yet to take it off my workspace. I use it every time I watercolor on a card. No joke. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm just going to, first I'm going to take a look at my card here. I'm going to paint my leaves on the image green. So I'm going to just go ahead and pick up one of the greens here from the watercolor paint and just start adding green to some of these spaces that have leaves. And you don't even have to be all that precise when you watercolor. Some people get really caught up in being precise and staying in the lines, and I just don't. I think it's nice and relaxing to paint, and you're working on a card like this. I think it's fun just to be kind of loosey-goosey and enjoy the overall process. I'm also going to use this shimmery pink to paint some of my roses here. And sure, I could spend a lot of time and add a lot of detail and do lots of layering and colors. I just don't find it all that necessary when I'm working on little cards like this. And they come out just beautiful, so I rather like this kind of painting. Lines, I think, are suggestions. So I am going to add just this light pink here, and then I am going to go back in and use one of the darker shimmery pinks and add just a little bit of depth to the center or the back sides of some of these little roses here. And I have to be kind of careful with the shimmer paints because they can be a little opaque when they dry. I don't want to put too much shimmer down and then I lose my lines. Of course, if I hadn't taken my stamp off of my Misti, I could put this paper right back in my stamp positioner and stamp it again and bring out those stamp lines again, but I took my stamp off, which is fine. So just adding a little bit more color here on some of these roses. And if you hear some weird chewing noises, Oliver is in here with me and he's chewing on a bone. Okay. There's also some little berries and things around. I'm going to pull out some lavender to paint those. And sometimes when I paint on cards, there's enough paint up here in the lid that I don't even have to dip into I don't even have to dip into the paint squares at all. I can just gather up paint from the lid for my last painting session, which is kind of nice. And these paints have lasted so nicely, actually. I've barely even made a dent in them. And considering the number of projects that I've painted with them, it's pretty impressive, I think. So, all right, so there's the purple, and then I'm going to go ahead and paint the grapevine wreath. I'm going to paint that a medium brown. So there might be some of the grapevine wreath popping in here and there between the roses, so I'll just pop a little bit of brown in there. Doesn't have to be too exact. And I can see down here where some of the ribbon is crossing in the image. So I'm going to reserve those ribbon spaces for the color that I'm going to paint the ribbon here shortly. And you can see how these stamped text areas have dried. I think they look really beautiful. pink. There might be a little rose here too, so I'm going to add some pink here. And then I'm going to use gold paint, gold shimmer paint for my ribbon. And make sure that I get some of that gold paint where these ribbons are showing down here on the wreath. All right. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do is actually use some light blue, and I'm just taking some of the color from my palette lid here. So I just had a little spot of blue there, and so it's not really a true color at all. And I'm just going to water that down really thin, and I'm going to create kind of like a shadow here in the center of my wreath, and just paint that really loosely. And because I've added that distress ink, I could actually even just paint with water, and it's going to activate that ink and give me a little bit of pigment to scooch around. So just like that. And next what I'm going to do is that same thing kind of around the outside edges of the painting or the wreath, and just really loosely give that a little bit of painting there, so it kind of looks like there's a little bit of shadow behind the wreath. Okay, just like that. And now what I want to do is I want to add some splatters to my project here. So I'm just getting wet water or water on my paintbrush and just kind of flicking it down onto my project here. And what that's doing is adding water in random spots. That's going to activate that distress ink and allow me to pick up some of that pigment or that ink onto this little hand towel here. And now you can see those white speckles is where the water actually was on the watercolor paper here. I think that looks really pretty. So next what I'm going to do is a little bit more stamping in the background. I think it could use just a little more distressing. So I'm going to actually ink up my stamp here again. And I don't want it such a dark impression this time, so I'm going to stamp it off one time. And I'm still going to mist it with water. And it's okay if I get a little water down on here. Let's see, my signature is on the bottom there. There we go. And see, I can stamp it multiple times because there's a little bit of pigment left in the stamp here that's transferring to my paper. So there we go. And actually, you can even spritz this with water and kind of bleed out some of that stamping as well. So I'll go ahead and do that too so you can see what that looks like. All right. Now I'm going to set this aside and let this dry completely before I move on to my next step here. So I'll be right back with you. All right, so my panel is dry now. So what I'm going to do is add a little bit of distressing around the outside edges just to darken up, kind of like a vignette. So I'm just going to use my blender brush again and just hit the edges with that same vintage photo distress ink. There we go. So I think that looks really pretty. Now I'm going to use my tracing wheel This is my favorite crafting tool. And I'm just going to add some faux stitching here along the outside edge, just for a little fun detail. And I like adding it kind of in random places. You could make it go, you know, completely around each edge, but I kind of like the randomness lately. So there we go. And I've brought a piece of cardstock in for my card. So what I'm going to do is actually add a little bit of stamping here to the base of my card using the same sentiment stamp, just to add a little bit of visual interest where I know my cardstock from my card base is going to be showing. Okay. And the paper that I'm using, this little scrap, is from this soft and scrumptious paper pad or paper pack that I got from my friend Gabby a couple years ago. It's from Polka Doodles. And this paper has been so fun to use, and I would love to have a dozen of those. I use that paper pack a lot in the spring. So I'm just going to add some ink here. I know this paper is already just distressed slightly, but I just want to make sure it has similar color tones to the ones I'm using on my card here. And then I'm also going to do a little bit of inking to my card base as well. All that jingling is Oliver. He's being a busybody right now. And because I like to make sure my entire card looks cohesive, I'm going to add the ink to all four sides of my card. Both the insides and the back and the front. And I don't have any of the extra paper cut right now, so I won't add it to the card while I'm working on it with you, but I will eventually add some of this paper to the inside and probably to the back as well. So I'll use my Teflon bone folder here to score my card. So what I'm going to do now is use my glue and adhere this to the front of my card. And I'm going to use my tracing wheel again to add some faux stitching here. And a lot of this will be hidden by my painted panel, but that's okay. Now I'll just snip off the excess here. And now my card front is ready to add this beautiful painted panel. I think I'll add it flush to the right side here. So I'm going to cover up my stamping down there completely. That's okay. It very slightly says Emily Dickinson down here on the bottom. That's perfectly fine. And we're almost done. I'm going to add one of my little twine bows here and a strip of some cotton lace from the Dollar Tree, if I can ever find the end to my twine. Oh my goodness. There it is. There's my twine, and let me grab some ribbon as well here. And I think I'd like this glued right here. I think that'll be cute. So I have my hot glue gun on for this. I'm going to fold that right around to the inside, and that'll be beautiful on the inside as well. Now I can make a bow to add to there. And I've cut a little piece of twine that's probably a little long, but better a little too long than too short. There's a cute bow, and I'm just going to put a little dab of glue right there and press it down with my finger. You'll want to be very careful because hot glue can be very hot. And then just cut these little ribbon ends or twine ends so they're not too out of control. There we go. And now you have a really beautiful card. And one last thing that I like doing, not on all my projects, but a lot of them lately, I've been adding some splatters with my watercolors once I have the card complete. So I'm just going to grab this kind of loosey-goosey paintbrush that I have. It's kind of just a floppy mop brush. And using the same watercolor pigments that have the shimmer in them, I'll grab a little bit of that gold that I used on the ribbon and just flick some watercolor pigments onto my project. That's going to be really pretty. And then I'll add some to the other panels of the card as well. And it dries pretty quick on the cardstock. Go ahead and set that down, and then I'll grab maybe a little bit of the pearl shimmer as well and add just a few more dots. So here what I'm doing is just picking up some of that shimmer paint, just really, really thinly watered down. There we go. And I'll put some of it inside too. I just like everything to look cohesive. There we go. I need to let that dry, but there's the finished card. I think this is going to be so beautiful. I know I'm going to enjoy sending it off to a friend who will probably enjoy it as much as I enjoyed making it. So I hope this has been helpful and you've enjoyed this little technique. Maybe you're inspired to try it yourself. It's super fun and really easy. So thanks so much for watching. Bye.